Bonsoir tout le monde. Bonsoir. Nous allons commencer. Good evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be with you tonight and to have this very high-level panel. Ce séminaire porte sur l'analyse prospective, l'évaluation technologique et le suivi au futur cadre de la CBD. Vous pouvez tout à fait prendre des documents qui sont sur la table. Et sans plus tarder, je vais vous présenter mon nom, Louise Van Vlack. Je suis professeure au département de sociologie à l'Institut des sciences de l'environnement. Et j'ai le plaisir d'animer ce soir. Je vais demander d'abord à Jim Thomas, qui est directeur de recherche à TECLA, actuellement basé à David, qui a une très très riche expérience internationale de 25 ans dans le suivi de l'impact des technologies émergentes sur les droits humains, sur la biodiversité, sur l'équité des systèmes alimentaires, ainsi que sur les questions de gouvernance relatives aux nouvelles technologies. Jim est l'auteur et le co-auteur de très nombreux rapports des disciplines sur les développements de la biologie synthétique, de la géoingénierie, des nanotechnologies, du big data et d'autres plateformes technologiques également. Il est également un observateur actif dans le processus de l'ONU, notamment à la CBD, où il fait partie du groupe d'experts techniques ad hoc sur la biologie synthétique. J'imagine que plusieurs d'entre vous ont déjà entendu en anglais ce que je viens de dire en français. Si vous avez vos écouteurs, vos dispositifs techniques. Et sans plus tarder, je vais demander à Jim d'introduire cette session et de nous indiquer les objectifs principaux de cette rencontre. Est-ce que Jim?
Merci beaucoup. Mais je parle en anglais. Thank you.
Yes.
So thank you very much, Louise. Thank you everybody for bearing with us. We had to change rooms and bearing with us as we did so. Obviously, this is the first day of a very long COP, and we're going to all get to know each other very well. I would say we have some swag. I don't know how that word translates.
Impossible.
There are going to be reports which you can pick up, and as the COP goes on, you may find yourself wanting one of these blindfolds to put over, which says, "Don't blindfold the CBD, horizon scanning, technology assessment and monitoring." This is the main thing that we're going to be talking about here. The Convention on Biological Diversity has always been able to look forward, to understand what's coming around the corner, and to work together between countries to assess and then follow and monitor new technological developments. And we hope that that's going to happen in the next 2 weeks here. These terms, horizon scanning, technology assessment, monitoring, turn up a number of times in the decisions of the convention, certainly in the last few COPs, around the topic of synthetic biology, which is going to be was already on the working group 2 today, and will be going into working into a contact group tomorrow. And when we talk about horizon scanning, we are really talking about that ability to see what's coming, to be able to, and we're going to hear from both Dr. Ricardo Steinbrecher and others involved in the ways in which we can get a better understanding of what technological developments are on the horizon. Technology assessment, I work with the etc. group, for us technology assessment is one of the key tools for environmental and social governance for the next century. That with technologies coming ever faster and ever more powerful, having the ability to understand and take apart the impacts are not just on the risks, but also the societal impacts is extremely important. And we'll hear from others about ways in which technology assessment is happening. And of course, monitoring, you need to always be looking, you can't just see what's coming, you have to keep following it. And we know that in this convention, whether it's on living modified organisms or work on geoengineering, the convention has to keep coming back and checking what is happening. We've heard in the open-ended working group in the last few days, those of us who are here, that we should be dependent on the text that we were given in 1992, when the convention was first negotiated. And I want to bring you back to the heady days of 1992. Some of us were there, some of us might not have been there. It was a time when, technologically speaking, while George Bush the first was speaking in Rio, and the space shuttle Endeavour was heading off into space for the first time, the first web pages were going up. There were literally 30 web pages in the world in 1992, and the very first text message was sent. This is where we were technologically. We went home and we watched things on VHS videos. We listened to our Walkmans. If you were very lucky, you might have been able to shell out for one of these Simon phones, which was the very first smartphone. It looks nothing like what we're used to now. Nobody had yet eaten a genetically modified organism, but that was a few years still to come. So, this was the time when the technological horizon around us was different. But nonetheless, the convention knew they had to look at what was coming. And so we have Article 7 on identification and monitoring, which asks parties to identify the processes and categories of activities likely to have significant adverse effects on the aims of the convention. That's to say, to be horizon scanning, to be trying to identify what's coming. We also have Article 14, which talks about impact assessment and minimizing adverse impacts. And you can't talk about minimizing impacts without first understanding them. And interestingly enough, even back then in 1992, those who were negotiating this text, and maybe there are people here who were there, I know there are some, talked about the importance of allowing for public participation in such procedures. And that's a big part, actually, of what we're going to talk about today, that if you're going to fully understand what a new technology and new developments mean, you have to listen to different voices and different ways of thinking. And of course, the precautionary principle was enshrined in Cartagena, but the precautionary approach was in the CBD. And in order to be precautionary, you have to be doing assessment and monitoring. You have to be looking at what's coming. We have the SUBSTA, the Subsidiary Body on Scientific, Technical and Technological Advice, which really is a horizon scanning body to some extent, although it's limited how much it can do because it's a kind of a political body. But it sets up groups such as the ad hoc technical experts groups and so forth to try and carry out the technology assessment function. And indeed, the convention has continually, over its more than 25 years, addressed new and emerging technologies far ahead of other conventions. This is the place where not just living modified organisms were first dealt with, GMOs. We had the Goetz moratorium, Terminator moratorium. We had work on biofuels that came here very early, GM trees, ocean fertilization moratorium, geoengineering, synthetic biology. This has become the home for discussing synthetic biology, gene drives. Part of what's incredible about this convention is its ability to stay relevant and not get stuck in 1992. And indeed, many of the things we're discussing here today, DSI, for example, couldn't have been imagined 25 years ago. So when the first ad hoc technical expert group on synthetic biology was convened in 2017, and there were a number of people from that who are here in the room, one of the things that technical expert group said was the importance of regular horizon scanning, monitoring, and assessment of developments in this field of synthetic biology, that this field was moving so fast, and it needed other types of information and knowledge that could be gathered, including from traditional animal and crop breeding, forestry, aquaculture, outside of the traditional expert routes or scientific expert routes, recognizing different types of expertise. And that this was needed in order to understand assessments of the potential positive and negative impacts of synthetic biology. And so when we came to Decision 14.9 in Sharm el Sheikh, most recently, it was agreed by all the parties that there is a need for a broad and regular horizon scanning, monitoring and assessing of the most recent technological developments. And I just want to emphasize this, that there's no question here that whether this is something that's going to be part of the program of work. It's agreed. It's agreed that this is needed. That's the language there. And on that basis, it's gone back to the ARTEC to elaborate what this regular horizon scanning, monitoring and assessing process should be. There's been some attempts by certain countries to say, oh, it's not agreed that we have this as a new and emerging issue, and this sort of endless loop process on synthetic biology, that some of you will know. But this is a decision that comes after that. This decision is more recent than that. It's a decision of the entire COP that it is needed, and therefore we have to have the modalities for it. So at this COP, that's what we're discussing. What is the modalities for this horizon scanning, monitoring, and assessment? Not whether or not it's needed. All three parts of that are essential. So the second ARTEG on synthetic biology spent a considerable amount of time talking about what such a process could look like. And that was 5 days, I think, that we were there. We were up very late at night, and a lot of very good, and that is to some extent, there was a certain amount of multidisciplinarity there, came up with these 4 steps: information gathering, compilation and organization of information, assessment and reporting on outcomes, and then even went to sort of say, well, here's how this could look, step by step. We made and I'm not going to go through it all here, but this chart which talked about all the different steps and how you could gather information, different types of knowledge in the horizon scanning process, how you can bring in different types of assessment, including participatory assessment and assessment from indigenous peoples and local communities. This is a broad attempt to say this is how something could look. And indeed, we now have a decision in front of us with a number of brackets around it, which says that this body should establish a process for broad and regular horizon scanning. Glad to see that doesn't have brackets around it. And then trying to understand for a period of 2 cycles, is it an intersessional periods? Remember, if it's going to be regular and it's got to be longer term, we have to have it more often and over a longer period of time. And at the heart of the proposals that came initially from the ARTEG and then discussed by Subster and now is to be discussed here, is that we need not just an ad hoc technical expert group, we need a multidisciplinary ad hoc technical expert group. That the kinds of knowledge that lets you quickly understand the impacts of emerging technologies in this era, now that we're in 2002, not 1992, require that you draw quickly on different types of knowledge. And I think that's the heart of what we're going to be discussing in the next 2 weeks, establishing this multidisciplinarity and having this expert group, because things have changed, and you'll hear this from some of the people here on this panel. That this area of synthetic biology is moving tremendously fast. And honestly, it's not just synthetic biology. We're seeing whether it's changes through artificial intelligence, blockchain, and other things. Every single area of what we know as conservation of biodiversity is transforming, and we need that kind of ability to quickly see what's changing and quickly come to some understanding of it through collaborating together. This is also actually in SBI, where this document, I won't go into all of it, very much says we need to enable technology horizon scanning, assessment, monitoring, and judgment on appropriate technologies. The language is now, that's beyond just synthetic biology. We're talking here about across the whole convention. And of course, the language is there in the Global Biodiversity Framework in brackets and Target 17, the importance of the implementation of horizon scanning, monitoring, and assessment. And even there in the Kunming Declaration, the importance of assessment. And finally, it's even in the glossary. And, so as I say, there's no doubt that we're going to do this, that the parties have to do this. They have to do this to be relevant for the next 30 years. What matters is that we agree to get on with it and don't get caught up in an endless loop of distraction. I think I'll stop there.
Merci Jim pour cette excellente introduction qui met très très bien la table pour le travail à faire. Je vais demander maintenant au Dr Margaret Engelhardt, chef du département réglementation des OGM et biosécurité à l'Agence fédérale allemande pour la conservation de la nature. Elle est microbiologiste et biologiste moléculaire, évaluatrice des risques relatifs aux organismes vivants modifiés. Auteur de nombreux articles et de 5 ouvrages sur les risques et l'évaluation technologique des applications du génie génétique. Elle est également membre du groupe d'experts techniques sur la biologie synthétique de la CBD et fait partie de la délégation allemande ici à Montréal. Merci, Dr. Engelhardt.
Thank you, and thank you very much for this invitation. Yes, I'd like to make 2 steps back from what you did, Jim, explaining the process. And I'd like to introduce you why at the last, or at the ATEX of synthetic biology, we thought it is so important to have this horizon scanning. And that's why, or the main reason is that in biotechnology, we have a transition actually in biotechnology. So we have, for many reasons, a change in what we can do with biotechnology. That's digitalization, that's automatization, and last but not least, also genome editing with CRISPR-Cas as an important instrument. So now we have pretty powerful instruments to change organisms. And not just change one gene, but probably also to change many genes, or make shuffling within the genome. So we also have new kind of organisms we can change now. And we have also new areas we are discussing now, and being coming from a nature protection agency, for us it's also important now to have a close look on these applications that are discussed in the context of biopopulation beyond the agriculture systems. So we shouldn't underestimate the power of these tools. And being a risk assessor, being responsible to see the dossiers of GMOs being imported to the EU together with many others, it is important to be prepared to understand what will be the future application I see or we see on our table. And I'd like to give you some examples. For example, there's a huge research on GM viruses to be released. There's research on gene drive you probably heard about, but also on RNAi to be properly sprayed on organisms that might change how genes are expressed in these organisms, GM animals like fish or insects. So far, when I started to be a risk assessor, we normally work with soybean, we look at cotton, maize, and soy, yes, soybean, maize, cotton. That's the most important organisms. But now we have to think about how do we do a risk assessment for all these organisms, and we have many new questions. And I'm really happy that at the CBD we now decide this horizon scanning monitoring and assessment so that we can work together among parties, but also with the help of, for example, groups that have other knowledge, as, for example, IPLCs, to really understand what these, if these organisms are being released, what this means to the aims and the goals of the convention. And so we are really hoping that this horizon scanning, monitoring, assessing of synthetic biology will be a valuable instrument, because I think parties cannot just do the job alone. They need to cooperate in it and to have help. So I do hope that with these instruments we do see early enough, for example, what kind of developments are there, where, for example, currently our GM viruses are released. So we don't really, so there are many parties that don't have it in their mind, that currently we have cases that GM viruses are released. So what does this mean? Do we have, for example, when we want to import fruits from areas where GM viruses are released, how can we detect them? Then numbers of questions. So it's gene drives. How can we get data of the receiving environments of the populations that might be influenced? So, but these are questions about risk assessment where we need to coordinate and share knowledge. But there are also other questions that are important. For example, if you think about applications that are now being discussed. For example, that protected species are being genetically modified. So of course, you have questions like, is it sensible? Are the goals that are discussed really being reached? And what new risk assessment question we have, but we also have conceptual questions, and that's what we put in the text of the last ATTEC. We discussed it among us. That, for example, we have to think as being nature protection people. If we genetically engineered a protected species, is it still something we want to protect or not? What is it? Is it something that goes along with our concepts of nature protection or not? And these other levels of questions, or for example, what would it mean to the cultural practices of, for example, IPLCs, if we have organisms that spread in the territories of IPLCs. So for this, I'm happy that we also have this assessment part in the horizon scanning, monitoring and assessment, because this assessment is looking at more than one level, not just risk assessment, but also technology assessment. And also looking at questions like, is it going along with our concepts of nature conservation? So I'm really happy that we were able to also fund a research project on it, and we will hear about later how we can make knowledge more accessible, for example, from IPLCs to parties. How can we make it? How can we make the bridge between IPLCs and parties in the CBD? And also, I'd like to make a small advertisement block here. We will do a side event together with Switzerland on Friday lunchtime, where we will present a position paper, for example, that we made at the Federal Agency for Nature Conservation in Germany, where we also discuss these conceptual questions and also legal questions. And also we will together explain why we think that this horizon scanning is important in the context of the in the concept of conservation and the precautionary principle or approach. So that's all I want to say.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, Madame Engelhardt. Je demanderai maintenant à Ricarda Steinbrecher, biologiste et généticienne moléculaire, qui représente la Fédération des scientifiques allemands. Depuis 1995, Ricarda est étroitement impliquée dans les négociations et les mises en œuvre du protocole de Carthagène sur la biosécurité. Elle a siégé au Ad hoc Technical Expert Group pour l'évaluation et la gestion des risques. Et depuis 2015, elle est également membre du GSET, de la CBD, sur la biologie synthétique. En 2019, elle a co-publié un ouvrage intitulé Gene Drives, A Report on Their Science Application, Social Aspect, Ethics and Regulation. Basée à Oxford, au Royaume-Uni, elle est membre du conseil d'administration du réseau européen des scientifiques pour la responsabilité sociale et environnementale, l'ENSER, et co-directrice d'Econexus. C'est à vous, Ricarda.
Merci beaucoup. Good evening, everyone. Let me just... thank you. I don't really think about this conference. Now something is happening. Oh, do they do it small or not?
It's one with the R at the end. That one. That is second copy above.
But the main location provides you to the same 600.
You can just look at the PowerPoint, it might be on the PowerPoint. It's in the PowerPoint.
Oh,
Ok,
there's something. Great.
ça sent bien. Voilà.
You have a screen here. Here again.
So if I just move it like that. Yes, I do. Wonderful. Once more again, a lovely good evening to everyone. And well, we are here once more again for a round of negotiations, and as we've already heard, it is really, really important
In the back.
in the
The interpreter.
I stay closer then. Okay. It is important for all of us to actually know that sufficient horizon scanning is going on, because it's helping us to know what do we need to prepare for in terms of the knowledge base we need. And it's a bit what Margaret was saying. How do we assess something if we haven't looked at it previously and would know which areas of knowledge are required in order to understand its impacts, its development, its trajectory, its impact not only on the environment but maybe on our mindset. For example, Margaret said, if we genetically modified wild species, are they still the ones we understand to be the wild species? And I once was at a very good event at the Natural History Museum, and it was, if we modify organisms sort of that they are in between species, what is our understanding all of a sudden of a species? All of a sudden everything that was quite clear starts slipping. That means also our relationship with it. There's lots of questions. But what I would like to go into here is just simply share with you sort of the latest research we have done, which is on a horizon scanning survey on the current and proposed targets for gene drive development. And it's odd because you will have to keep your, not look at me, but please look at the screen. I don't know whether there is somewhere, oh yeah, I can do that. So the first publication we did was in July 22, which looked at the current and proposed insect targets. And I'll share some of the findings in a moment. But we only just published our findings on the current and proposed non-insect targets. That include vertebrates, such as mammals. It includes snails, fungi, and plants. I mean, all these species that are here, these groups, they are being looked at for the application of gene drives. For the first one can go to this website. Unfortunately, I mean, I did a few printouts, but somehow the printer here did not quite realize that there's tables in it that need to be printed landscape. So therefore it is pretty tiny small here, but if you have good eyes, you're welcome. Then there is equally the same as with our preliminary publication, but that's not on our website yet. But I believe I can put it up on the CBD website for sharing. There's a document possibility. Now here, looking at insects. What we found, for example, that about 32 insect species or groups, taxonomic groups, in this case from 6 different orders, are proposed or under development for gene drives. The largest one is the mosquitoes, as you can see, in terms of an individual species. An individual, you can't see it here actually, in terms of the activities on it, I should say. but it just makes 6 species, whilst in the flies and in the diphtheria, we have 10 that are being targeted. And you can see sort of like this table is in the report, totaling 32. So we can see like how it is spread with this survey. Or one can see that Uppsala, whilst 9 of these 32 proposed targets are vectors of human disease, in particular malaria, the majority, 21 of these, are actually agricultural pests, including 4 livestock pests or livestock disease vectors, which partially overlap with the human disease vectors. So one can see that the trend, or the big tendency, is actually going towards agriculture here. This is how it will look like. You cannot. Is it just for me blurry? I guess so. Whilst on one side you can see the species and the geographical range, then there's the intended use or the intended direct effects. For example, here in the reduction of the transmission of malaria, and the intended direct effect would be the population suppression, or the type of gene drive, sort of like the categories we made, but then also the name of the researchers that they gave them, and then sort of where the research was being done. And then the big task was really to see how far is it into the development. Is it just being, sort of, is there some funding? Is it just being proposed and has got some basis behind it? Or has there been, oops, I apologize, this really keeps popping. How do we go back? I'm having. Is that the one?
Yes, very good.
We were not there yet. I don't know why it's starting from the back. Okay, here we go. So here you can see, like we had to figure out like how far it is from being released, from the potential of being far enough for release. And you can see here that some of the mosquitoes are pretty far, but there are still stages to go. And okay, and so this we've done for like all the different ones, and you can see, for example, here like others have less development behind them. But here, for example, it's the moths and butterflies. I just wanted to share with you like which kind of species there are. Or if you, for example, look at this one, you can see the publications per year related to gene drives. You can see it started off quite slow in the beginning, and then around sort of 2015, sort of a year after like Eswell's publication and the first proof of principle, well, that is actually in that year, it goes up really steep, but now it is actually plateauing out by about 135. Okay, now this is sort of the ones you will see if you look at the non-insects. You can see its house mice is a large number, but then you have carnivores like cats being targeted, being put as a target, or possums, or deer, or rabbits, birds. You can see this whole list. And I can't believe I keep doing that, Ricarda. And the interesting thing is that it is mice that actually will be the research object for all these other mammals. So a lot of the research is really intended for making it possible to put gene drives, for example, into rabbits. Just as an example here, to see, you can see which ones have been modeled with the M in it. The one in blue are the ones that are not intended for release, etc. So let me move on. No functional gene drives, for example, systems have so far been constructed in plants. A homing CRISPR gene drive was reported in Arabidopsis, but it was later retracted. There appear to be significant obstacles actually in applying homing gene drive technology in new species, other than the ones we have seen from the beginning. So in different taxonomic groups. That's of interest, but developments are going ahead with trying to find other routes. I will not maybe go into it further because my time will run out, but the important point is here, what could we, for example, when we look at it, think? It is really considered as a pesticide, almost, as a new pesticide. For example, it was said that even if rabbits would be eradicated globally, it would still be worthwhile doing that as a side effect in order to get rid of them in Australia. So you can see sort of the discussions that we have. Where are the boundaries all of a sudden? Who is deciding what? How can we get ready for it? And if that is a tendency, that it is like a pesticide, then it has accumulative effects. Who will look at that, you know? Some serious reflections are needed here because we keep thinking it's just a very few species that are looked at, but it's actually thought as very wide. So that's what I wanted to share with you. And if you want some of these bigger plonks in small print, please come here.
I'll have plenty. Merci beaucoup, Ricarda. Nous devons continuer et j'imagine que vous avez énormément de questions. Nous pourrons les prendre à la suite des autres interventions. Je demande maintenant à Silvia Ribeiro, basée au Mexique et directrice pour l'Amérique latine d'IPLCs, qui a travaillé en tant que journaliste et militante pour l'environnement en Uruguay, au Brésil, en Suède, et qui a une vaste expérience de défense des enjeux sociaux et environnementaux, de nous adresser quelques mots. En tant que représentante de la société civile, elle a assisté et suivi les négociations de plusieurs traités environnementaux des Nations Unies. Elle a également été invitée à s'exprimer lors de nombreux événements de la société civile dans le monde entier sur les technologies transgéniques et autres nouvelles technologies, sur la concentration des entreprises, sur la propriété intellectuelle, sur le droit des autochtones et des agriculteurs. Merci Silvia.
Gracias. That I will speak in English. I'm sorry. So, well, I'm very happy to be in this panel and have heard the other panelists and what I will share, and then my colleague Barbara from Africa also will share, is a concrete experience of how we can do technology assessment at grassroots level and with organization, and how this connects to CBD and other efforts that you are mentioning here. So I will refer very quickly to the experience of the TECLA, which means Latin American Network for the Social Evaluation of Technologies. One thing is that in general, and I think is just coming back, why do we need technology assessment? And some of the reasons is that, you know, we are always presented by the promoters of a particular technology with this paradox of either it is too early, so the promoters of a technology doesn't want to have any discussion because that will cut, you know, the development of the technology. Okay, I don't know how to fix that. It's here, so I don't know why they put this out. It wasn't my fault. Well, maybe I should. There's something here, but
it might be from in this area. I don't want to touch anything.
There's an IT guy outside the door. He's waiting to help.
Okay, I continue. So I would say that some of the issues and why we need technology assessment, and I said that if it is for the promoters of a technology, the commercial promoters of a technology, it's always either too early or too late. It's too early when we are discussing, do we need this technology? What is the problem? We want to have precaution. We want to look at this. Oh, no, that will stop us from developing it. And then it is all over the market or the nature or something, and say, oh, it's too late to regulate. It's everywhere, and you will be cutting the business. So what we mean is that what we need is independent information on the valuation without the commercial interest. That is basic for public interest, but also to take into account many other interests, including views and perspective and not only interest. So what we have tried to do with these platforms is that what we call a platform is a collaboration among a set of organizations in Latin America, where we are analyzing different aspects of technology in general, science and technology, but also on particular technologies, and also from the point of view of, for instance, of different movements. So one thing is, for instance, why you may say, as many delegates here may think, why should this has to be participatory? Well, I mentioned it has to be independent from commercial interest, but it also has to be participatory in the sense that maybe what we call experts or technical expert doesn't have all the views that the technology, the impacts that technology can have, for instance, on indigenous peoples, local communities, farmers, or on women and workers. And, this is the kind of movements that we have invited to be part of this experience. So we cannot get this. I also wanted to mention that even when we speak about technology transfer, which we, being from Latin America, we perfectly understand that there are many governments in the Global South that are demanding the right to have technologies that may be needed for a country. The problem is that many times transfer of technology has been dumping phased out or obsolete technologies, or even pushing into countries in the South technologies that we don't need and maybe we don't want, and maybe we have much better options. But because we don't have this independent evaluation or in the public interest, it may be very difficult even for governments in the South to have this evaluation. So it's not only about this kind of general evaluation. So we are not recuperating that. Okay, I cannot even move the presentations. Sorry, I will open it here. I'm sorry. So we may. Oh, it's there.
It's not the laptop because the interpretation's gone as well.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, what happened?
The interpretation's gone. It's something central.
Ah, I see. Okay, so okay, sorry for that. So as Jim Thomas mentioned in the beginning, that we have a long history of technology assessment and precaution in CBD. In fact, I could say that this is one of the conventions that has put more efforts into that. And he mentioned some about, for instance, genetic modification, genetic manipulation, but also on synthetic biology, new biotechnologies, on digital sequences, on geoengineering. Those are all areas where it has been a real kind of prior tech assessment on technologies or opening, so there could be really a broader discussion on these technologies. And now we have a lot of other new technologies. Some are mentioned here, like gene drives, but there are also others, different proposals, for instance, for climate, that are supposed to be, to have a shortcut, a techno-fix into, instead of making the necessary changes and emissions reductions, use a techno-fix like geoengineering. That was also one of the issues that CBD was very early to warn about. And because of all of that, that is still there, and it's increasing now, both on climate and techno-fixes for conservation and all that, we need the CBD to maintain this precautionary base, the precautionary approach, and because of that, we need horizon scanning and participatory evaluation. So, Sorry for it. So what we do in the network in Red TECLA was established in 2016, but we had a process since 2008 of forums and meetings and meeting among different movements and so on, and different kind of organizations. Like I am from ETC group, but we have inside TECLA we have also environmental organizations, yes, but also women's organizations, trade unions, labor organizations, youth organizations, critical research organizations and associations. We have like the equivalent of Union for Concerned Scientists in Latin America is also one member of this network, and others. And farmers, La Via Campesina is also member, the Latin American Via Campesina, and the World March of Women. And the reason to have all these as a permanent members is like a kind of international coordinating committee, is that we have discussions around different axes. We can care. Wow. Okay, let's see. Okay, I will try to go faster. Sorry. Okay, so I was explaining this. I will try to integrate these different perspectives that are not only on environment, but also biodiversity, and then on economy, on democracy and governance, and integrate gender, cultural perspectives. Also, taking into account indigenous and endogenous knowledge and our own innovations. And one main question we try to put in this network is, what are the real needs? And are there alternatives? Because otherwise the discussions on technologies tend to be very narrow around a particular technology that is already there, without considering, do we need this technology for what? What are the needs? Are there other answers? So, I mentioned this about, we have this international coordinating committee. We have quite extensive advisory councils. Most of them are scientists, but there are also other scientists from different sciences and also experts from different countries in Latin America. And then the network and the platform is not just these organizations. It is like an open platform depending on which technology and what are we evaluating. And then we invite different groups to be part of the cases of evaluation. So I mentioned some of the members. This is the present International Coordinating Committee. And the areas of work. We have horizon scanning on new technologies, but also the science and technology in historical context, and mapping of the technological critique in Latin America. And we had also, we have these interventions at international UN fora, not only CBD, also, for instance, at the UN, at the Science and Technology Forum. Okay. And we have done different cases for evaluations. I wanted to mention this ongoing research project that is funded by the German government, which is with TECLA, also with the participation, which is about having a social assessment of novel technologies focused on gene drives, taking the views and perspective of indigenous people, peasants and small farmers, and other movements and communities. And this is done with different forums and dialogues and discussions, but also we aim to systematize all this. We have invited several experts to do this, and aim to share this experience with the CBD on a later stage. These are some of the case studies we have done. We have all the publications and case studies we have done on our website, which is that one. And thanks for the time. Sorry for taking time.
Merci Sylvia.
Barbara, maybe you want to be here or you?
No, stay here. Ok. En fait, c'est qu'il y a des gens qui doivent partir pour 7h30. Nous sommes bien conscients et il y a 2 intervenants encore. Alors, si il y a des gens qui veulent rester après 7h30, nous prendrons quelques questions. Mais nous ferons une pause à 7h30. Voilà maintenant Barbara Ntambirweki, qui est basée en Ouganda. Elle est juriste, avocate auprès des hautes cours de l'Ouganda et également chargée de cours en droit de la propriété intellectuelle. Elle a plus d'une dizaine d'années d'expérience dans la recherche et l'analyse des politiques sur les systèmes alimentaires et les technologies émergentes relatives aux cultures OGM, à la biologie synthétique et à l'agriculture numérique. Consultante pour ETC Group, elle coordonne le groupe de travail africain sur la numérisation, qui fait partie de la plateforme africaine d'évaluation des technologies, AfriTAP. Merci Barbara.
Merci. I forget. Thank you very much for that very good introduction. The beauty about speaking last is that you don't have to over-explain yourself because a lot has been said. I'll be very quick and just talk about what's happening in Africa. To be very blunt, Africa has become a dumping ground and testing ground for new technologies in Africa, from agriculture to health to climate. We're now, at the point of being, we're now new wave of automation, from artificial intelligence to biotechnology to big data to synthetic biology and geoengineering that has been explained by Silvia and Jim. And so these technologies are really being presented to Africa as a solution to all our problems. It's going to help into social economic transformation of Africa. But at the same time, it has potential to destroy and threaten African communities that depend on these systems for livelihood. And so the new technology that is driving and having a huge impact on our continent is being facilitated by weak regulatory systems in African countries where we have corporations, philanthropists coming together to come together and take over our governments and insist on introducing these new technologies. And so there is lack of participatory assessment and evaluation without consideration to our African history, where we have had long innovations, traditional knowledge that is being usurped by new technologies. And I'll give an example of my country, Uganda. I can see that there's so many target malaria officials here, Imperial College. There is a new this GMO mosquito that's taking place in Uganda. And it has been in Uganda since 2012, but there has been no participation of civil society in the development of these new technologies. So we are talking about the need for participatory assessment, and that is why horizon scanning and technology assessment is very important for Africa. And therefore, I'll just talk about AfriTAP. AfriTAP is African Technology Assessment Platform, and it brings together African civil society groups, movements, independent scientists, lawyers, media professionals who are working to understand and assess the implications of new and emerging technologies in Africa, and to help Africans to emerge and assert control over the new technologies that are taking over our continent. And therefore, AfriTAP is a Pan-African movement. It monitors, it analyzes, it assesses, and looks at the emerging technologies with a focus on the impact of these technologies to biodiversity, conservation, food sovereignty, and climate change. And therefore, AfriTAP also wants to challenge the current narratives on technology that is being promoted in Africa. We want to set our own alternative framing of what technology should look like. We want to promote our indigenous peasant knowledge that is being, that has been relegated now to the new technologies that are being pushed. And therefore, AfriTAP has, as we speak right now, we have two desks. We have a desk in Francophone Africa that is being led by HOMEF Africa, and we have Anglophone Africa that is in Burkina Faso. And these desks are helping to understand and assess the emerging technologies that are taking place on our continent. And it's important to note that AfriTAP also has a good structure, like what Silvia said. We have a steering committee that sits to understand how we move forward. How do we assess the technologies that are coming onto our continent? We have digital technologies that are taking over smallholder farmers, technologies that are being developed for big monocultures, and yet our smallholder farmers who are the backbone of many of our economies, cannot use the technologies that are being developed for Africa. And so, Profit will engage African civil society organizations, movements to understand the issues and to catalyze actions and African-related narratives, especially with regard to promoting our indigenous traditional knowledge that we have known since time immemorial. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Désolée. Merci beaucoup. Maintenant, le Dr Moustapha Fouda, ministre conseiller de la biodiversité et point focal national des institutions de la CBD au ministère d'État pour les affaires environnementales, conservation de la nature, au gouvernement d'Égypte. Il travaille à la mise en œuvre de la stratégie nationale de conservation de la biodiversité et des plans d'action en développant notamment un réseau de 30 zones protégées, représentant environ 15% du territoire égyptien. Il est aussi l'ancien doyen chargé de la vulgarisation au Collège d'agriculture de l'Université Sultan Qaboos. À vous. So, it's up to you. Thank you very much to be there.
Thank you very much. Since everyone is in a hurry to finish this, I will just look at it from another perspective. That means it's fine that we deal with all of the issues of biotechnologies, and I'm personally a marine biologist, professor at the university, but I became interested in the environment in 2000. And whenever I had a problem related to technologies, there is a lady over there, Carter, and Christine as well. These are the ones that I always get in touch with them. Whenever I have a problem over the last almost 15 years, and certainly Jim as well. So these are the ones that actually are the source of information, so I cannot add more what they have already said. But as a national focal point and as advisor to the Minister of Environment in Egypt, there are certain things that we have to consider. Normally, when I face a new technology or whatever, I ask two questions. Where are we now, and where are we heading? When it comes to where are we now, I remember Jim when he said something about the importance of scanning, horizontal scanning. For who? For you. How many people from Africa are here? What does it mean? If I go and speak to my minister, I talk to him about horizontal scanning, he may laugh at me because he doesn't understand what I'm talking about. But if I use language, we need to change the communication language in terms of not as a tool itself, but as benefits for the country, benefit for the government, whatever, etc., benefit for people. This is quite a completely different story. Where are you heading? The gap is still continuing on between developed and developing countries. How can we narrow the gap? Simply, where is capacity building? Capacity building is very, very important, especially in developing countries. But do they have resources in these developing countries in a way that they can actually implement capacity building? I have with me this gentleman, he's one of my friends, my colleague in Egypt, Dr. Osama. Actually, he's the one that he already raised the issue of horizontal scanning when we were in Mexico, if you remember. And it caused a lot of problem at the time. We didn't understand what he was talking about, whatever. So we need capacity building, not only in terms of training, because training is fine that you can train people. There was a risk assessment, I think, workshop a couple of days ago. So what? They'll go back home, maybe they change their position because most of them, they are governmental people. But you need some sustainability of this kind of things. And from my experience as a governmental, as a scientist, as an NGO as well, you have to go to civil society. Civil society, they are the grassroots, that they can do things on the ground. They can actually make changes. I think on Friday we will make a side event on our contribution, the civil society role and contribution towards the GBF and CAP 15 in a way that we hope that you can provide some assistance with it in terms of capacity building, or perhaps you can establish some NGO to make you understand what does it mean, what are the benefits from them. I mean, the only way how I communicate with my minister, I never mention anything about threatened species or endangered species, because he or she doesn't know what does it mean. But when I talk about them, that there is opportunity in terms of investment, for example, you will understand the issue. If I talk about in terms of health, they will understand. The same thing for education and gender issues, whatever. So what I'm trying to say, we need to change the communication language in a way that people can benefit from them and understand the issue. Otherwise, it's very interesting. I love these presentations already made, but we are still left behind, and which is a pity actually. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you, Louise. Just before I finish, I think it's an important moment to raise something on the topic of gene drives, which is taking into account all the risks and all the unresolved issues that we have on gene drives. That I'm also Barbara Pills from Save Our Seeds, sorry I didn't introduce myself, that we have a manifesto demanding a global moratorium on the environmental release of gene drives. And it's important to note that this is the third COP that this is being brought up by civil society, and that remains still an issue, and that more than 150 organizations have signed this moratorium, so an invitation for organizations to sign it and for parties to listen to. And if you want more details on that, I'm happy to provide. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Il est déjà 7h30. Je sais que c'est extrêmement frustrant parce que